here we are in Essex County, Virginia at our vineyard in Hustle, and this is our 4th episode of our namesake tasting tour where we're going to taste our Chardonnay today. But first, a little bit about the property. So behind me is the house. So what we know about the history of the property is that in the early 1700s, a man by the name of John Spindle was over in England, and he was actually sentenced to servitude here in Virginia at the age of 12. So came over here, served his time, and apparently did quite well after that, and was able to purchase up some land. Apparently this land was deeded to his son, also John Spindle, and he was the one who built the house. So there are many, and apparently they called it Bloomsbury at the time. So we don't know a whole lot about the history of the house, but one of the interesting stories that we have heard is that during the mid-1800s, during the winter, there was an inhabitant of the house who passed away. And they were unable to bury his body outside because the ground was frozen. So they ended up burying him inside the house in the basement. And there he stayed until the following spring, when they tried to extract the body but were unable to get the coffin out. So they ended up covering that up and leaving it there, and now it's covered with concrete, and for all we know, he's still there today. So we thought we would bring you out to the vineyard here at Hustle, and I'm standing here in the Dornfelder. Now, the vineyard was originally planted over 30 years ago by a Dr. Hasselhoff, no relation to the Baywatch dude. He planted about 26 acres, and among the varieties, he had 2 German types. One was the Muscat of Hamburg, which we no longer have here, and the Dornfelder. Now, a Dornfelder, you don't see that a lot in Virginia. We like to have fun with it here at Septenary. So it's a very hardy grape, very large berries, very red. So some of your wine club members, you'll remember that we did a Dornfelder Rosé last fall, which was a lot of fun. So we purchased the vineyard back in 2014, and in addition to the Dornfelder, we also grow Merlot, Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, some Viognier, some Pinot Gris, and also some Chardonnay, which is the wine that we're going to be tasting today. So let's go drink some Chardonnay.
Hello everyone, Todd and Andrew here. We took a road trip for episode 4, about 2.5 hours east of Charlottesville, and we find ourselves in Essex County, Hustle, Virginia to be more specific. Population about 500. This is our Essex vineyard. Close to 26 acres originally planted, and we're here to taste the Chardonnay, most popular white wine grape in the world. Andrew?
Yeah, so here we go. Let's try out our Chardonnay. This is from the 2017 vintage. So a lot of you, I would suspect, thinking about trying the Chardonnay, tasting the Chardonnay. I'm sure some of you may not be as enthusiastic about Chardonnay as others. There is a phrase, the ABCers, anything but Chardonnay. But really, Chardonnay is this beautiful grape. It's definitely a little bit more of this versatile canvas that has a lot of potential that we can take in a number of directions. So from a winemaking perspective, Chardonnay is really exciting because you can do a lot with it. It's expressive. It'll react really well in stainless and oak and different types of winemaking styles. So I'm sure you've seen Chardonnay as a stainless Chardonnay, or as an oaky Chardonnay, or in a blend, or even in sparkling wine. So just in that, you can see Chardonnay popping up in a lot of different styles. And then thinking a little bit more locally, those of you who are familiar with Virginia wine, or more specifically even just within Central Virginia, the Monticello Wine Trail, if you go to a number of wineries, you're probably going to see a Chardonnay on almost every wine list. But no 2 Chardonnays are ever the same. So, when folks come in and say, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Chardonnay, that's totally fine. You know, I just want you to try it and see if you like this one. And then if you're going to another winery, try their Chardonnay and see if you like that one. Because each style of Chardonnay is going to be a little bit different. And I think one thing that really sets our Chardonnay apart is this location. It's a very different site, very different soil structure, which Todd will talk about in just a second. But then, you know, the way in which we decided to make the Chardonnay is a little bit different. So, you know, I mentioned the stainless and the oak style of Chardonnay. With the 2017 vintage, we actually did a combination of both. So this is 25% new French oak aged and then 75% stainless. So you're going to get a little of that oaky influence initially, but then you also get some of those truer, purer notes of the Chardonnay grape. You get the really nice floral, fruity notes from the Chardonnay that give it some nice acidity and kind of balance out that oaky characteristic. So let's try it out, or do you want to talk about soil?
So before we go there, just one point on what Andrew was saying about trying out Chardonnays. So the recommendation would be, as you try the Chardonnays at different places, understand what you're drinking. Do I have an oak Chardonnay? Do I have a Chardonnay with malolactic fermentation? Do I have a stainless steel Chardonnay? And then you can sort of play with what you like. As Andrew said, this particular Chardonnay, 75% stainless, 25% oak, is sort of our attempt to blend both worlds, if you will. But as you experiment with Chardonnay, it's a fun wine to sort of play with and realize there's so much across the spectrum to like about Chardonnay, or in some cases dislike about Chardonnay. So let's talk a little bit about the soil structure. I'm going to reach down and get my props. So soil structure here at the Hustle Vineyard, you see it very light, sandy soil, as opposed to, for comparison's sake, this is what we see at the estate. So here the water tends to drain very quickly. The minerality really shows through in the grapes. So with the Chardonnay in particular, we see a little darker color coming through in the grapes. A lot of minerality. We really wanted to preserve the minerality when we produced this wine. So that's part of the reason why we didn't want to put too much oak on it. Make sure you get that minerality as you taste.
Yep, exactly. So go ahead and get a good whiff of that now. So stick your nose in there. Breathe in that Chardonnay a little bit. And yeah, you're going to notice a few things about this Chardonnay that I think make it different from others. So the oak aging. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a chemistry lesson for the day. Todd had touched on this malolactic fermentation. So for those of you who don't know, malolactic fermentation it's a natural fermentation that occurs with red wines. Almost all reds go through malolactic fermentation. Whites, it's more of a stylistic thing and something that the winemaker can control. So it's changing the acidic structure from malic acid to lactic acid. So malic acid, think like a crisp Granny Smith apple. It's going to be tart. It's going to really pucker your palate. And then turning it into lactic acid. So lactic, think dairy. So that's why a lot of times Chardonnays may be described as buttery. Especially, I'd say a lot of times like California Chardonnays can be described a bit more as this buttery tone. And that's largely from malolactic fermentation, and also the oak influence as well. You get some more of that vanilla buttery note to it. So again, aromatically, get a nice whiff of that. I think you get a little of that buttery note. It's not too overly aggressive. And yeah, there is definitely this noticeable kind of mineral component to it as well on the nose that really sets this apart. So go ahead and take a sip now. And again, we're going to follow that journey of that oak influence and malolactic fermentation on the palate.
So you get a slight buttery, creamy, I would say, a nice round mouthfeel, but you're not overwhelmed with sort of that heavy, oaky, buttery feeling that some people think of when they think of a Chardonnay, that heavy oak Chardonnay.
Yeah.
And I still get that crispness of the fruit.
Exactly.
with apple, pear, maybe.
Yep, yeah, maybe a bit of like apricots, so it's a, not thinking specifically of apricot, it's not like a super high acid fruit. But yeah, you get some of those really nice fruit notes, you get a little of that oak influence just to kind of balance this wine out on the palate a little bit more, make it a little more delicate. You still get a nice, slight pop of acidity, but again, it's not aggressive, it's not as bright as maybe like a Sauvignon Blanc is or something. But yeah, overall, it's just a really nice, well-balanced, well-rounded Chardonnay.
And we've talked about our oak program with the red wines before. In this particular situation where we did take the 25% and put it on oak, it was new French oak. So we kind of hit it hard with oak on that 25%, the 75% stainless. But it also makes this a very versatile wine as far as pairing it with food.
Yep. Yeah. So, thinking about foods, you're not going to want to go with anything super heavy and aggressive. But maybe like a more moderate kind of pasta dish, maybe a bit of gnocchi, something that's going to complement this well, have a slightly fuller mouthfeel, but not light and bright salad, not like a super heavy protein either, but yeah, just a nice moderate pasta dish would go fantastic with this Chardonnay.
Sarah and I have found ourselves pairing this with all sorts of dishes that we wouldn't have thought pre-pairing to do. So yeah, experiment with this particular one.
Yeah. So I think that covers kind of the aromatics, the palate, that mouthfeel. Todd, do you want to talk naming conventions at all with this one?
Sure. As you know, we name our wines after buildings on the property, in one case after the property itself. So this particular wine we named Chardonnay because it's Chardonnay.
Very well put. That's great. Great reasoning. So, let's see here. We're missing anything?
I don't think so. So, couple administrative items. One, we threw out in the initial, in the introduction, that any who guessed where we were going to do this tasting would get 50% off a bottle of wine of their choice. And those who guessed were nobody. Nobody guessed. Or at least nobody guessed correctly, I should say.
There were a few good attempts, but yeah, no one nailed Hustle as the hidden location.
And that staircase that you saw in the little hint was the staircase in the main house. Sarah talked a little bit about that in the beginning episode. So I think that's it. Thanks a lot for coming to Hustle, seeing the vineyard, and traveling with us. Till next time, cheers.
Cheers.